Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Yud, which connects very much back to where we started at the end of yesterday's daf. So we started with kamatz bismol pasul. If you do the kemitza with your left hand, you're disqualified. Today is going to all be about that, but we're going to get off on lots of tangents that are connected with that topic. So we're going to start with a bit of a background, what we started yesterday, but without actually looking at the psukim inside. And for this, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look first at the psukim about the leper, because if you remember what we did yesterday was we started with saying, what's the source? Rabbi Zeira said the source is really that there's four mentions of the word left. The kaf, the palm of the kohen, uses his left, and it says it 4 times, and then we show, which I'm not going to go back to, but we show why it was important to have all 4 times. That the 4th time makes it very clear, right, that we're actually trying to say that any time it says kaf without left, it means right, and that leads us to the kemitza, because in the kometz, when the kohen goes to do the kometz, it says vayakrev et mincha v'yimalei kapo mimen, and he fills his palm with it. So now we're going to see every time it says hand or palm, however we define it, but let's just say hand. The hand without any descriptor, it means right. Okay, and that's Rabbi Zeira's source for the fact that kamatz bismol is disqualified. But let's look at the psukim about the metzora. So the leper, if you remember, he brings 3 korbanot. If he's rich, they're all 3 animals. If he's poor, he brings 1, the asham, and that's the one we're focusing on, is an animal. But the others, he's going to bring birds. Okay, that's not really important for our purposes. What's important is, what does he do with that asham? And if you remember, with the asham, he takes the blood from the asham, and he puts it al tshnuch ozen hametehera yemanit, bo and yado yemani, bo maglo yemani, right? He also sprinkles the blood on the altar, but in addition to that, he takes the blood and he puts it on the ear, on the right ear, on the right hand, which is the thumb, and on the right foot, toe, big toe of the leper. Okay, that's what he does in both processes, and I showed you here on the chart. If you're looking at the chart, you can see that, this is on the study guide, the kohen takes from the dam asham, v'natan kohen al tshnuch ozen hametehera yemani, bo and yado yemani, bo maglo yemani. And when it comes to the poor leper, it says exactly the same thing. Repeats everything, even though theoretically there's really no difference here, right? And especially the main thing the ani does different is he brings birds for the other offerings, not for this, right? He brings 1 la'olah, 1 lechatat, and here it's really all one the same. Shachat keves hasham, v'lakach kohen midam hasham. He takes from the blood. V'natan al tshnuch ozen hametehera yemanit, bo and yado yemanit, and bo maglo yemanit. Okay, this is all in chapter 14 of Vayikra. So that's repeated. Okay, next section. Then after the kohen finishes with the blood, he then takes oil. If you remember, lakacha kohen, 1 kohen takes milog Hashem, and they measured out in a log. That was a measuring implement that was the size of a log. V'yatzak al kafa kohen asmalit, and then he pours it into the hand of a different kohen, into his left hand. Then that kohen, and this is why it's in his left hand, that same kohen takes the hand, right, which is full of oil. Tavala kohen et etzba'o yemanit, he dips his right finger into the shemen, min hashemen asher kapo asmalit, that's in his left hand, which we already know. That's what we talked about. It's all unnecessary, right? The extra left is unnecessary. He goes to the parochet and he sprinkles before the parochet. And if you look on the other side of the chart where it talks about the poor leper, same thing. From the shemen yitzok kohen al kaf kohen smalid, he pours it into the left hand of the kohen, and then v'izah kohen be'etzba'o, and he takes with his finger, sprinkles the shemen asher al kapo smalit, that's in his left hand, sheva pamim lifnei Hashem. There's minor differences between the psukim, but the main ideas are completely repeated. And then process number 3. What does he do with the oil after that? Miyeter Hashem asher al kapo, from whatever's left on his hand, yitena kohen al tshnuch ozen hametehera yemanit, abo and yado yemanit, abo maglo yemanit. Again, he does it the exact same places as the blood, puts it on the ear, the toe, the finger and the toe. But this pasuk says al dam hasham, on top of the blood of the asham. So now it even begs another question. Besides all this repetition, and by the way, it's also repeated on the other side. Natan kohen min Hashem asher al kapo. He takes from the oil that's on his hand. Right now, I'm on the leper, the poor one. Al tshnuch ozen hametehera yemanit, bo and yado yemanit, bo maglo yemanit. Right in all 3 places. Al makom dam hasham, in the place where the dam was put. Okay, where the blood of the guilt offering was put. So basically, we have two problems with this section. Number one, if you already said al damha, right, besides the obvious, which is, again, just like all the others, why repeat it for the poor leper if it's exactly the same thing? Number two, if it tells you put it where you put the blood of the asham, well, we already know where the blood of the asham went. So you actually don't even need to say al tshnuch ozen yamanit, bon yado yamanit, and bon raglo yamanit. Okay, and that's where we start today. So today's shir starts out. Now, for this, I did a chart because we're going to have Rabbi Zeira's reading of these psukim and how he understands the repetitions and all the extra words, and then we're going to have Rava. So first in the chart is what we have from yesterday, which is smalit 4 times, right? The fact that it says left 4 times teaches you kol makom shneimar kaf ena el yamin. Okay, according to Rabbi Zeira, that teaches us our halacha. Kemitza b'smol is pasul. Okay, because here it says kaf smalit. By kemitza it says kaf without smalit. It must mean yamin. Okay. Now at the bottom of Tet Amud Bet, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zeira, abon yado yamanit v'abon raglo yamanit dichtiv b'shem metzora ashil lamali. What do we need the bon yado yamanit, the bon raglo yamanit, by the rich leper? Meaning, in the first case, why do you need it? Now, it says this in parentheses. It seems like in this Masechet and also in Tzvachim, there are a lot of things in parentheses because they seem to be notes that somebody took on the Gemara that somehow got incorporated. So sometimes it's wrong girsas, but sometimes it's just extra words that actually help you, but they're not really in the original text of the Gemara, or at least in most of the manuscripts. So that's why they put in parentheses. It should be taken out, but theoretically I'm going to read it because it really helps you understand the question, which is Dahaktiv Adam Ha'asham. Since it already says, put it in the place where you put the blood of the asham, we know it's on the ear, the finger, and the toe. So you don't need to tell us that. It's very obvious. So the Gemara explains, or Rabbi Zeira explains, Rabbi Zeira says, why does it say bon yado yamanit and bon raglo yamanit in the oil of the rich leper? Chad lahakshir tzdadim v'chad lifsot tzidei tzdadim. So he says, it comes to teach us some other halacha, which is, one is to when you have extra words, sometimes you could say the first is to include an additional case, and the second is to exclude a case. So that's what they do here. They say when it says on the finger and the toe, what it's saying is on the finger and even on the side of the finger or the toe. That's lahakshir tzdadim. It doesn't have to be just where the nail is. It could also be on the side. But the other comes to disqualify tzidei tzdadim, but not underneath completely, right? Not the bottom of it, okay? Not the side of the side, okay? Which would be the bottom part, okay? So that's all. It's coming for some additional halacha. That's why it's there. Now, okay, what this doesn't answer, though, is if that's there on the metzora ashir part to teach you something new, well, it certainly doesn't need to be on the metzora ani part. And that's what's going to bother Rava. Okay, he's going to say, okay, partly that and partly he's going to be bothered. I get that you want to say, okay, it goes on the finger, but not underneath, not right, and yes, on the sides. But why do you need yamanit in all the cases? Why do you have to say the right, the right, the right? That's really unnecessary also. And your answer doesn't really resolve that. So we're going to get back to that. But right now, he asks another question, okay? This is Rabbi Yirmiyah asking Rabbi Zeira, al dam ha'asham va'al makom dam ha'asham lemay atu. Well, right, number one, if you already said tnuch ozen, boen, all that, why are you telling us the same place where you put the blood? We know it's the same place you put the blood, right? And why do you have to say in both places al dam ha'asham and al makom dam ha'asham? And another question really is, why is the wording different? One says on the blood of the asham, and the other says on the place of the blood of the asham. So what do we need these both psukim for? Hanet tzriche, we need them. Why? Well, ikatav rachmana comes from Rabbi Zeira and he says, listen, if the pasuk had said al dam ha'asham, on the blood of the guilt offering, hava amin, I would have thought what? Put it on top of the blood. So then you would say the following, ite in, if it's there still, put it there. Nit kanach, what if the leper, after putting it there, said, ich, I have blood on me, I want to take it off. And he rubs the blood off, and now when you go to put the oil on, there's no blood there anymore. Maybe you'd think, well, you have to put it on the blood. If the blood's not there, maybe you can't do it. Therefore, katav rachmana al makom, that's why it said in the place where you put it. So one, right, The first one sounds like it has to be actually on the blood. The other one says, no, just the place. Okay, so then they say, okay, well, if it doesn't need to be there, then you should have just written the place. So why does the first one say al dam? Ikat Rahmana al makom, if it said on the place of the blood, what might you have thought? Havamina dafka nitkaneach. Maybe you would have thought it has to be cleaned off before you put the oil on. And why? Well, we'll see in a second. Aval ite, if it's there, maybe it's something blocking, right? You're not allowed to have a chatzitza, something in between. You're supposed to do the mitzvah, put the oil directly on the skin of the leper. If there's blood in between, maybe it doesn't work. Kamash malan, that's why you have al dam. It can go either on the blood or on the place where the blood was. Either one works. And that's why you have both those. So far, Rabbi Zeira answered a lot of things, but as I told you, Rav is going to come and say, Amar Rava me'achar dechtiv al dam ha'asham v'amakom dam ha'asham uktiva yimanit bedam. Okay, so now, since it says al dam ha'asham or makom dam ha'asham, and it says yimanit by the blood, okay, so we know it has to be on the right. So al bo'en yado hayimanit, al bo'en raglo hayimanit, ichtive b'shemen metzora ashir ve'ani lamali. So then he basically says, I don't understand why you need the yimanit, and I don't understand why you need it also repeated in the poor person, in the poor leper. So basically, Rava rejects everything Rabbi Zeira said and starts from scratch. Ela amar Rava. So now what's the main thing we're looking for? How do you know the kamatz b'smol is pasul? So that he's going to learn right away from the word yimanit. That was bothering him that Rabbi Zeira didn't deal with. Amar Rava, yad yad kemitza, rega rega lechalitza, ozen ozen l'ritzia. He says, why does it say al tshduch ozen metaher hayimanit? Right. Once it says again al dam ha'asham. Well, why do you need yimanit in all these places? Okay. So what are you going to do with that word yimanit? And ozen yimanit, yad yimanit, regel yimanit. Each one is for gezeira shava for a different time that the hand is mentioned, different time that the regel is mentioned, different time that the ozen is mentioned. And each one is coming to teach you that in that parallel case, you're basically going to also need yamin. And that's what he says. So let's go through the drashot. Yad appears by kemitza. So because yad appears by kemitza, we're going to say, yad by kemitza, that means yad must be yamin. Regel appears by chalitza. So because it appears by chalitza, the regel that you do chalitza with in the ceremony, right, with the woman whose husband dies without children, she has to do chalitza with the brother. So they take off the right shoe. Ozen is the ear that gets pierced of the Eved Ivri, the Jewish slave who doesn't want to leave his master on the 7th year. He gets his ears pierced. Which ear pierced? Right, ear pierced, not ears. Which ear? The right ear. And we get that from the Ozen HaYimanit. Okay, so he has 3 halachot to teach that. So what we have now, if we take a perspective for our sugya, which is kamatz b'smol pasul, according to Rabbi Zeira, it's from the 4 times smalit is mentioned here, which teaches that any time it says kaf, like by kemitza, it must be right. And according to Rava, it's a gezeira shava from kemitza. Okay. Now we're going to go on within Rava and say, okay, well, what's the problem? If he doesn't learn smalit to teach you right by kemitza, then smalit lemai ata. What is smalit coming for, according to him? So Rav Shisha answers this question and said, what is smalit coming for? Amar Rav Shisha b'rei Rav Idi lifsol yamin de kohen b'metzora. To say that the yamin of the kohen can't be used for metzora. Shelo tomal. Now, why would you think? Now remember, what happens? The kohen puts the oil in, right? One kohen 1, puts the oil in kohen 2's hand. Which hand? His left hand. And then kohen 2 is holding the oil in his left hand, takes his right finger, dips it into the oil, and that's why we kind of assumed it had to be in the left, because the dipping has to happen with the right. Okay, there's a few cases where this happens. The most famous one is the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur, where he can't possibly hold both in one hand. He has to bring the pan with the coals, and he has to bring the incense. So he has to put, right, the incense in his the cup, the spoon with the incense has to go in his left hand. Also here, he can't do both, so we're going to put the oil in the left. However, still you might have thought that maybe it could work in the right. Okay, so this section is kind of ignoring the fact that there's no choice but to put, the oil in the left so that you can sprinkle with the right. But they're going to suggest the following. You might have thought, lifsul yamin de kohen b'metzora. You might have, right, they're going to say, the smalit 4 or 2 times really. He's not really talking about the 4 right now. He's talking, why does it repeat al kapah smalit the second time, right? It says, remember, he takes it and he puts it in the left hand of the kohen, and then the kohen dips his finger into his left hand. Why does he have to say it twice? It's to say, you might have thought that maybe you could do yamin. And it wants to say, lifsol yamin de kohen b'metzora. The kohen cannot put the oil in his left hand. In his right hand. Forbidden. Now, why do you need a special pasuk to tell you? Shelo tamar, that you wouldn't say the following. Now, you might have thought, and it's logical, Uma bimkom shelo nitrabta small, nitrabta yamin. Now, a place where you're not allowed to do small, you can only do yamin, which is many of the places. So if when you can't do it in the left, you can do it in the right, wouldn't you then think that bimkom shenitrabta small, in a place where you can do left, eino din shenitrabta yamin? Couldn't you also do yamin? This is actually very similar to what we saw a few days ago, learning davar mitoch davar, and they said maybe if you can slaughter in the courtyard, of course you could slaughter in the heichal. It's more sanctified, right? If you could do it with left, you could obviously do it with right. So smalit is repeated to tell you, no, this must be put in the left. And the reason is really because of what I explained, because you have to dip your right finger and do it with your right. You can't both have it in your hand, in your left hand, and in your right hand and sprinkle it with your right hand. Okay, so that's what he does with smalit. So we explained the first 2 things, right? Both according to Rabbi Zeira and Rava, the smalit 4 times, which Rabbi Zeira learns kamatz b'smol pasul, right? It can't be done in the left hand. And Rava learns that it's just trying to stress here that the kohen who gets his oil in his hands has to be done in his left hand and not his right. Okay, but what didn't Rava explain? Okay, and the dam ha'asham makom ha'asham we explained. But what we didn't explain according to Rava is v'idach smalit lemay ata. But what about the other smalit? Okay, we didn't discuss according to Rava, number 1, the smalit that appears on the ani case. And, okay, mine, it's in parentheses here, but you can really add it in, yad v'regel yamanit ani. And all the mentions of yamanit on the poor person's side. In other words, Rava didn't relate at all. What he related to is the repetition within the ashir, that you don't really need yamanit a second time, because you know if you put the oil in the place where the blood was, you obviously know it's in the right. And the smalit, the second time it says it on the rich person's. But he didn't explain any of the repetition on the side of the ani, right? At least Rabbi Zeira made reference to it when he said smalit is 4 times, and we had the whole discussion yesterday, why you need all 4, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to learn it. But he doesn't explain at all why you need this. So they answer, Lechidutane deber Rabbi Ishmael, and they basically neutralize the question. They say, because he holds like Rabbi Ishmael, who says, like the school of thought of Rabbi Ishmael, this is against Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Akiva darshans every single et in the Torah, and every extra word is needed for some reason. But Rabbi Ishmael has a different approach. He says, Kol parasha shene'emra v'nishnet, any parsha that is said and repeated, like metzora ashir, metzora ani, lo nishnet ela b'shvil davar shenitchadesh ba. It's repeated for the new thing it was brought for, meaning we needed to say, well, there's a different track if you're poor. And then they just repeated the whole thing. So yeah, it's really not necessary. But it was necessary to say that the poor person has a different track. So once they mentioned that, they basically went through the whole thing again. And don't make too much of it, is what he's saying. Okay, finish that section, although we are going to come back to it. Okay, so again, if you want to look at the main thing you want to take out of this, besides the different ways each one darshaned each of the different sections, but the main point for our purposes is that the source for kemitza b'smol pasul, you can't do kemitza, the kohen has to use his right hand. For Rabbi Zeira is from the word smalit, mentioned 4 times here. And for Rava, it's this gezeira shava from the word yad. Okay, keep that in the back of your head. We're going to come back to this soon. Because now we're going to go into Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish is going to have a completely different source for this, and what's going to be confusing to us is that Rava is going to explain Rish Lakish, and kind of as if he holds by him, and eventually we're going to get back to, wait, this is a different source for that halacha, but Rava learned it from Yad from kemitza. So how can he be saying we're learning it from some other place? And we're going to have to resolve that, but that's much later. So Rish Lakish comes and says the following, and he's quoted by Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Okay, he says in the name of Rish Lakish, Kol makom shenemra etzba v'kehuna ena el yamin. I hope you remember this. It sounds familiar anyway. We learned this in Zvachim. Anytime it says finger and kohen, it means yamin. This is like a code. You see the word finger, and you see the kohen has to do something with his finger. That means with the right finger. Now, when they heard this statement, what did they think? The way it sounds. And now, whenever they say they think, we're going to see it's not exactly. Etzba vikuna v'inan. You needed to say the word etzba, and you needed to say the word keuna. That's what they assumed. Okay? And that's what I put here. Etzba vikuna. You need both. If you just have kuna, I don't know why I just did that. If you just have kuna, or you just have etzba, no. But now we're going to have a difficulty on that. Okay, first they're going to explain why. Okay, this I didn't put in the study guide, but we're going to read it. They're going to bring an example. Okay, it says the kohen took, kohen, notice, from the blood of the sin offering, be'etzba'o, with his finger. This is the classic korban chatat. Kohen puts his finger in the blood. Okay, it says kohen and etzba. What are we going to learn now? You mean? Because it says kohen and etzba. Where does it actually all come from? This theory of kohen and etzba, from the leper, v'gamar mi metzora, dichtiv, v'taval hakohen et etzba'o hayemanit. Now they're going to learn it from the leper, but not the way we learned it before, but that every time it says etzba and kuna, just like in the leper, it says, what does he do? The kohen dips his right finger. So you have finger, you have kohen. Remember, this is not the finger that it goes on the leper, the right finger of the leper. This is the finger of the kohen dips. You have finger, you have kohen. That equals, you mean, right. Okay, that so far is good. That's his proof. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute. V'harei kemitza deloktiv ba'ela kehuna. Oh, let's go to our case. Kemitza, there's no finger involved. There's the hand maybe, but there's no finger. So kemitza deloktiv ba'ela kehuna. Okay, because it just says the kohen does the kemitza, v'kamatza kohen. Utnan, and what does our Mishnah say? Kamatz b'smol pasul. This seems to contradict Rish Lakish's very nice theory and the way we understood Rish Lakish. To which Rava answers, I'm a Rava, remember Rava from before, O etzba, O kehuna. Rava says all you need is either etzba, which doesn't appear by kemitza, but appears in other places, or kehuna. You don't need both. Okay, that's his, so we thought that Rish Lakish said etzba and kehuna. Rava corrects it to either etzba or kehuna. But that's not going to work either. Because, okay, so every time we have a theory, we're going to say, but let's check it out in practice. So the etzba and kehuna didn't work for the kemitza, and either etzba or kehuna is not going to work for the next case. Amar Abaye, harei holachat, Amar le Abaye. Abaye says to Rava, harei holachat evarim lakevesh. This is in the korban olah. Remember we talked a lot about hefshet and nituach. You have to take off the skin, and then you have to cut it into pieces. Then, after you cut it into pieces, the kohanim bring it up the ramp. Now, the way they do it, there's a procession. Okay, we just had the thing about 13 kohanim are involved in the korban tamid. That's because we have a whole bunch of kohanim carrying different parts up the ramp. Now, there's the first kohen takes the two most important parts of the animal, the head and the right calf, okay, the right leg. So now they say, if so, what does it say by holachat evarim lakevesh? Okay, if all you need is etzba kuna to require right, we're now going to see the kohen who carries both parts. Again, this is the third case where you have to do something in the left because you can't carry the head of a big animal and the leg in one hand. So you're going to carry the head, which is more important, in the right, and you're going to do the leg in the left. And it doesn't say they're etzba. So if your theory is either etzba, it says, right, either etzba or kuna means right. Here you don't have etzba, but you have kuna. And it doesn't mean right because you don't have to do it. So let's read it inside. Harei holachat evarim lakevesh, taking the limbs on the ramp. Dichtiv behu, we're taking it to the ramp and then also up the ramp. Dichtiv behu kehuna. And according to Rav, if it says kuna, you need right because you don't need etzba and kuna. Dichtiv v'ikriv hakohen et hakol hamizbecha. Okay, it says the kohen brings close everything. Va'amar mar zohu lachat ivarim lakevesh. They say that pasuk means hikriv doesn't mean he's sacrificed. It means he brings it close. What's to bring it close? That's taking all the parts to the ramp. Utnan, and what does it say? So according to Rava's theory, it says kohen. The kohen brings hakol mizbecha. That's why I underline kohen. And what does it say about it? That's holachat ivarim. And tnan haregel shel yamin b'smol ubeit ora lachutz. So the right leg goes in his left hand with the hide facing outside. That's a side point. That's about something else. But what do you see here? He does it with his left. So now we have a problem. Because first we had a problem with etz ben kuhuna because of kamatz b'smol is pasul, right? And there it only says kuhuna. But now we have a problem because o etz o kuhuna then would require right, and here it goes in the left. To which they answer the following. And here's the chart on the next chart on the page, which is we're going to divide into two types of avodot. Kemitza is in one category, and carrying parts up the ramp is in a different category. What would be the category, the obvious category? Well, ones that are davar ha'ma'akev kapara and davar she'eino ma'akev kapara. What does that mean? Something that is necessary for atonement. One of the main, we've seen this many times, the main actions that without that you can't get atonement. That's like the kemitza. That's the main part of the mincha. Okay? You can't have a mincha without that. But if you didn't burn the parts on the altar, remember, the main thing of a korban is the blood. Once the blood is done, you already gotten atonement. This happens after the blood is done. So we're going to differentiate, our two problems were kemitza and carrying up the ramp. So we'll say, let's read it inside. We're now going to say, we're going to differentiate. So, I missed the place here. Okay. Ki amrinan, when we say, o etzba, o kehuna, bidavar ha'ma'akev kapara. When we say, o etzba or kehuna, either one, which actually makes sense to connect it with davar ha'ma'akev kapara. When it's something so important that without it you can't get atonement, it's enough to just have one word, either etzba or kuna, to require it be done in the right. This is a higher level. So, and the obvious, it doesn't say it here explicitly, but if it's eino ma'akev kapara, then you're going to need etzba and kuna. And that's how we come to this middle ground that resolves all the problems. Problem is, it doesn't resolve all the problems because now we have a difficulty. I say, wait a minute. So our theory is, again, let's just review. If it's essential, you need etzba or kuna, that's enough, and that's why kamatza kohen says must be done yamin. If it doesn't need kapara, you need both. Therefore, when it comes to taking the parts to the ramp, it just says ikrivu hakohanim. Kohanim is enough to say, kohanim is not enough to say you need yamin, and that's why you could do it in the left. Now they say, v'harei kabbalah davar ma'akev kapara. Okay, Kabbalah has to be done. Right? It has to be done. It's a major part of the process. Okay? And we're going to see, what does it say there? K'tiv ba kehuna. Now, according to our theory, o etzba, o kuna would require yamin. So because it says kehuna, d'chtiv ikrivu b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim et adam, zo kabbalat adam, right? This time when it says ikrivu in the pasuk, it means actually Kabbalah, according to the tradition, okay, but it seems pretty clear from the context also. So this drasha in Zvachim also. Utnan kibel b'smol pasul. Okay, so far so good. Okay, you do it if you do Kabbalah with your left pasul, that sounds great. But Rabbi Shimon machshir. Our problem right now is with Rabbi Shimon. We're assuming that Rabbi Shimon agrees with this theory. And if Rabbi Shimon agrees with this theory, why does he say Kabbalah can be done with the left? Okay, if you do it with the left, it's fine. But it says kuna. And we said something that's essential, if it says kuna, even if it doesn't say etzba, it requires left. So how's Rabbi Shimon going to explain it? So he's going to say, why are you assuming that Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Shimon ka'amarta? You're talking about Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon tartibai. He needs etzba and kuna. So we're now going to say, we made one distinction, which is davar ma'akev kapara versus davar she'eino ma'akev kapara. And again, if it's essential, either etzba or kuna is going to require right. It's going to require right. But Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree with that. Okay, so everything we said now, which isn't so hard to say, right, within Rish Lakish and the way Rava explained Rish Lakish and the way after Abaye's contradiction, difficulty, we had to kind of explain what Rish Lakish and Rava are trying to say. Rabbi Shimon just has a different approach, which is fine because they're within the rabbis, which is the mainstream position, and Rabbi Shimon has a different approach. Okay, so far so good. But they're now going to ask two difficulties on the fact that we're assuming that Rabbi Shimon requires both etzba and kahuna. So the first question, and that would explain why Rabbi Shimon says it's okay with Kabbalah, because it only says kohen, it doesn't say etzba. Well, umi by Rabbi Shimon Tartei, does he really need both? Okay, this is question number one. V'hatanya Rabbi Shimon Omer, kol makom shenemra yad eina el yamin, etzba eina el yamin. Okay, he says if you see the word yad, has to be done with the right. You see the word finger, has to be done with the right. What does that make it sound like? All you need is finger, you don't also need kahuna. So the Gemara answers, okay, we said you need both etzba and kohen for Rabbi Shimon. And that's why when it just said kohen, it wasn't enough to require the right hand. But we're now going to say the following in Rabbi Shimon. Etzba lo baya kahuna, kahuna baya etzba. If you have etzba, that's enough to say it needs yamin. But if you just have a sentence, like many psukim that talk about the kohen does this, the kohen does that, the kohen does that, doesn't have to be with the right hand unless it also says etzba. Which in the end really means that you just need etzba, because as soon as etzba is there, you don't even need kahuna. But we say it in this way for whatever reason. Okay, so basically you're going to say the Rabbi Shimon holds you need both. What he really means to say is if you have kohen, it's not enough unless you also have etzba. If you have etzba, that's enough to say you need yamin. If you have kohen, it's only going to need right if it says etzba. So now we have one little question on this, and then we'll get to a bigger question, which is ela kohen lamali. So then why did you need kohen in this pasuk? Okay, let's just look at the pasuk again that we quoted by Kabbalah. Hikrivu b'nei Aharon kohenim et adam. Now you don't need the word kohenim. You already have b'nei Aaron. We know it's kohenim. The sons of Aaron are kohenim. So why do you need the word kohenim? Side point. B'kihu no. It's to teach you he has to be with his priestly garments. If the kohen tries to do the avodah without his priestly garments, it's also disqualified. Completely different halacha, and that's what he does with the word kohen. Now we're going to say, wait a minute. We have another problem. According to what we just said, hare zrika delokti be'ela kihuna. Zrika also only has kahuna. Utna. Now, according to that, what would Rabbi Shimon say? It's fine if you do it with your left hand, just like Kabbalah, right? If in explaining Kabbalah, what did we say? Kahuna is not enough. You need kahuna and etzba to require yamin. Then zrika should also be fine. Biyad yamin, sprinkling the blood. Utnan, and what does it say in the Mishnah? Zarak b'small pasul. And note, velo palig Rabbi Shimon, it doesn't say that Rabbi Shimon disagrees like in the previous Mishnah. The Mishnah we quoted before, kibel b'small pasal, Rabbi Shimon machshir. There in Kabbalah, we saw there was a machloket. It fit perfectly. Kohen, no etzba, he says small. You could do it b'small. Here, you would come to the same conclusion based on our theory that Zrika says Kohen. It doesn't say etzba. You could do it with your left. But it doesn't say you can, to which Abaye has a very simple answer. It's true it doesn't say so in the Mishnah, but it says so in a Braita. Rabbi, pali b'Braita, d'Tanya. Okay, now we're going to read the Braita. Kibel b'smol pasul. First it starts off with Kabbalah. V'Rabbi Shimon machshir. So the first thing it tells you in the Braita is they have a machloket in Kabbalah b'smol, which matches what we saw earlier in the Mishnah that we quoted. Zarak b'smol pasul v'Rabbi Shimon machshir. And he also disagrees about Zrika. Okay, by the way, we saw this all in Zvachim. So there we resolve the difficulty. Okay, I'm going to just do a quick review of this section. Rish Lakish said, anytime it says Etz ben Kuna, it means yamin. Rava then, and after Abaye's difficulty, said, well, there's actually two tracks. When Rish Lakish said Etz ben Kuna, that's if it's not essential. You need both Etz ben Kuna. It's not an essential avoda. If it's essential and necessary for the kapara, it's going to need yibin as long as it either has etzba or has kuna. What do we do with Rabbi Shimon, who has a case where it says kohanim, and he doesn't require yamin? That's because he has a different theory. He thinks you need both. Okay, even in davar hama'akev kapara. And then we questioned him from some other places. We refined it a little and said, well, etzba by itself would be enough, just not kahuna by itself. And then what about zrika? Oh, zrika, it's fine. We have, Rabbi Shimon does say it's okay. So now we go back to what I kind of mentioned we were going to go back to, which is according to this, what's the reason for kemitza? It has to be done biyad yamin, according to this, because it says etzba, and because it says kiuna, right? v'kamatza kohen, and it's an essential action, and kahuna is enough to require the right hand. Okay, what's the problem? Well, the Gemara is going to ask, ve'ela hada amar Rava yad l'kemitza lamali mi kahuna nafka. According to what Rava just said in the Rish Lakish Sugya, where he explained that in an essential avoda, all you need is kohen to require yamin, then why does he need yad? Why does he need to make a gezeira shava from the leper of the yad to kemitza? Lamali mi kahuna nafka. He learns it from kamatza kohen. To which the Gemara answers, chad l'kometz, chad l'kidush kometz. There's two actions by the kemitza. We're going to take the drasha v'kamatza kohen, and because it mentions kahuna, that means yamin. That's going to talk about what it actually says, kamatza kohen. When the kohen puts his 3 fingers in, takes out the handful, that has to be done with his right hand. But there's another action. What's the other action? The other action is putting that, remember we talked about, first it's all in a sanctified vessel. Then you take it out, right? The kohen takes out the handful, puts it in another sanctified vessel. That's called kiddush kometz. So the yad, the bon yadoa yamanit, which is left unnecessary according to Rava and is coming to give you a gezeira shava to kemitza, is talking about for the next part in the process. When the kohen takes that handful and puts it in the sanctified vessel, that has to be done with the right hand. The placing of it in the sanctified vessel, the kohen can't switch it into his left hand and put it in the sanctified vessel. Okay, and that's why in the end, Rava needs 2 drashot. Okay, what's the problem? Just like in the previous sugya, we started raising an issue with Rabbi Shimon's shita. Same thing here. And we're going to ask, wait a minute, Le Rabbi Shimon, how are we going to explain this according to Rabbi Shimon though? De lo bai kiddush kometz. He says you don't actually need to put it in a sanctified vessel. He thinks that you can go straight from the kemitza act that you're doing, take it in your hand if you're the kohen, and put it on the altar. Okay? Or pass it off to a kohen to put on the altar. It doesn't need to go in a sanctified vessel. Or, there's a little bit of a disagreement about Rabbi Shimon, ulamanda amar nami debai kiddush kometz the Rabbi Shimon, and those who think you do need it, ubesmalach shurei mechsher. He for sure, though, says you could do it with your left. In other words, he definitely doesn't think that you need right hand for it. So yad l'rava de Rava lamali. So then what's, according to Rabbi Shimon, right, again, it's a little weird why we have to fit Rabbi Shimon in with Rava, but if we want to say that Rava is also, according to Rabbi Shimon, what's this yad drasha going to be for? And now they're going to continue with their question, because they're going to say the following. Now, let's just think about Rabbi Shimon. Kamatza kohen, right, we have 2 things. Rava said kamatza kohen is to teach you kahuna means right. So that's for the kometz. And then yad l'kemitza is for kiddush kometz. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, there is no kiddush kometz, so we're going to delete that off the list. But you know what? Don't you need it for the kemitza? Because remember, Rabbi Shimon, he can't learn it from kamatza kohen. Why not? Because he says kahuna is not enough to require right hand. So maybe it's the kemitza. Okay, that would be the obvious, but that actually can't be either, because ile kemitza gufe, if it's for the actual kemitza, aliba de Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, mi de Rabbi Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chia nafka. Actually, we learned that the words of Rabbi Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chia, we actually learned that Rabbi Shimon learns that the kemitza itself has to be done with the right from somewhere else. De Amar Rabbi Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chia, my time de Rabbi Shimon. He says, what's the reason for Rabbi Shimon? De Amar kra kodesh kodeshimi kachatat ka'asham. And what we're trying to find here is what we're trying to find is that kometz b'yamin comes from some other pasuk. But what they're looking for is, how do we know that? What's the reason for Rabbi Shimon not requiring a kli? So he learns it from this that it doesn't have to go in a sanctified vessel. Remember, the original dough is already in a sanctified vessel. So when you take the kometz out of there, it's already been sanctified. So why put it in a second one? So he says you don't actually need to put it in the second one. And he learns it from this pasuk, kodesh kodeshimi kachatat v'kasham. And what does he do here? He says, look, this is about the mincha. A mincha is like a sin offering and like a guilt offering. So how is it like both? Well, it's obviously trying to tell you sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like that. And here's the important line for our purposes. Bala ovda biyad, ovda biyamin kechatat. If you're going to do the whole thing by hand, take it in your hand and then burn it with your hand and not put it in a vessel, then you have to do it with your right hand, like a sin offering. So in other words, that's option 1. You can do it all by hand. You don't need a vessel. That's where we prove it, because it could be like a sin offering and it just goes straight. But then you have to do it biyamin. Okay? And there's our proof. From here, you learn the kometz has to be biyamin. Ba'lo ovda b'kli, if you want to put in a vessel, ovda b'smol kasham. Then you can do it like in your left hand, like the asham. In other words, then you don't have to be as strict with the yamin. You can put in the kli, right? And you can put in the kli even in your left hand. But the point being that here he learns that the kemitza has to be biyamin, and he learns it from a different pasuk. Kodesh kodeshimi kachata kasham. So Rava basically had to learn from the kamatza kohen. Okay? Shmuel couldn't have learned it from there because it doesn't think kahuna shows you right hand. And the kiddush kometz he learned from Bohen Yado Yemini Yad Yad. Well, Rabbi Shimon doesn't even think that that's true. The kiddush kometz, first of all, doesn't even need to happen. If it does happen, it doesn't even need yamin. But he already learns, he already learns kachatat ka'asham teaches you yamin in the kometz. So we're basically questioning, what is Rabbi Shimon going to do with Yad Yad? Assuming Rava has this gezeira, shava, Yad Yad, and the Rabbi Shimon it has to fit in with Rabbi Shimon. What's it for? And this is how we'll end our daf. Lo nitzracha ela lekometz minchat chotei. It's needed now. Rabbi Shimon already learned from Kodesh Kodeshimi kachatat. Okay, we don't even have to finish the pasuk because it's really from the word kachatat. From that word kachatat, he learns that the kometz, the action of taking the kemitza, has to be biyad yamin. But why would he need an additional pasuk? For one unique case that you might have thought he would make an exception to the rule. What's that? The minchat chote. Remember this? Sal kadat hachamina ho'il va'amar Rabbi Shimon shelo yehe korbano muhudal. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says, this is all, right? We have this on Davav. This is all, right? The minchat chote is a bit of an exception to the rule because it doesn't have shemen, it doesn't have lavona. And why is that, right? Lo yehe chote niskar. On the one hand, we don't want to reward you. You did a sin and you get away with, a cheaper offering. On the other hand, the reason is we don't want you to have a beautified korban. So you might have thought, ki kametz leinami b'smol tit kasher. So maybe if you do it with the left, it's okay. Because if it doesn't have to be nice, then it doesn't have to have all the proper, appropriate ways to do things. That's the better way, because it doesn't need to look nice anyway. Kamash malan. That's why you need yad yad l'kemitza. Yad yad is specifically for the minchat chote. Okay? And thus ends our sugya. So let's go back and do a quick review. That's what the study guide is helpful for. We started with a discussion between Rava and Rabbi Zeira about all the psukim and the repeat psukim in the leper. The leper both repeat within when you do the oil, why you had to repeat all the places when it already says just put it where the blood of the asham was, and why do you have to repeat in the poor leper's case. And then we had two different approaches, which again, if we zoom into what we're really interested in, it was really that Rabbi Zeira gets from the word smalit 4 times about kemitza has to be biyamin, and Rava gets it from the gezeira shava yad yad. Okay, and then we saw what kind of Rava took issue with it. Rabbi Zeira didn't really have an answer to, and then how each of them says it. And then Rava says the fact that it's duplicated, and the second scenario doesn't really bother us, whereas Rabbi Zeira took it seriously. Anyway, that was all the first part. Then we went, as if not connected, we went into Rish Lakish, who says etzba v'kuna also shows yamin, and that teaches us about kemitza. And then that kind of raised a red light. Wait a minute, right? And then we had to explain, etzba kuna, and depending on the scenario, makev kapara, not makev kapara, which one's which. We had to fix that with Rabbi Shimon. How does that work? We basically, Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree with it. That was how it works with it. It doesn't really work with it. He has the other approach that you need both etzba and kuna, even in a makev kapara, and that's why he doesn't require Kabbalah. That's why he doesn't require Zrika to be yamin. And from there, we then went back and brought the two sugyot together and said, wait, if Rava says the whole thing of kemitza comes from yad yad, but then he also says it comes from the kamatza kohen, because kohen is enough for him to say it needs yamin, what do we need both for? And then we say for the 2 parts of the process. And then we had to figure out, well, what does Rabbi Shimon say? And then we worked out Shita Rabbi Shimon with that as well. And with that, we finished today's daf, wishing everyone a good day.